All right. Here we go. Our theme today is music's beauty, excellence, and morality. And since this is being streamed, recorded, I just want to say at the beginning that I'm aware that the things I'm talking about today are very controversial in some circles, and I'm very aware of those controversies, and I'm not trying to address them. I'm just teaching our church family, and we're streaming it and recording it for our church family's sake. So I am not naive about some of the music wars, but that's not really our purpose here. What we've been doing for the last few weeks is trying to get a Christian perspective on music, and it's really important for Christians to have biblical perspectives on this for a couple reasons. One is, we've already seen that music is very important in the Bible, and so we spent a week on that. But a second reason is just the massive part that music plays in most people's lives. So let's try this. How many of you think that music probably hits your ears at least 30 minutes a day? Here we go. Hands, 30 minutes a day, music hits your ears. Okay, so let's try don't keep your hands up. Let's see, whose hand stays up at an hour? You think an hour of music hits your ears every day? All right, that's a lot of hands still up. All right, how about 2 hours? Music hits your ears every day. We're starting to get some of this thing going on out there. 3 hours? Still a lot of hands. All right, you can put your hands down. Okay, so I looked up several different studies about this. You ready? In society at large, the average person listens to music 16 to 18 hours a week, not counting radio or streaming music videos. When you add those, a Nielsen study from 2019 said the number is 32 hours a week for the average person listening to music, which does not include all of the music that is in the background, well, in stores and stuff, but in TV shows, streaming shows that people watch. And statistics say that people watch 20 to 35 hours of TV per week, and a good portion of that has music in one way or another, either throughout it in the background or at key moments of transitions and ads and whatever to help compel that message. So if you combine those two things together, my very unofficial estimates would be that there's a big hair on my iPad. Girl dad. My unofficial estimate would be the average person is hearing 25 to 50 hours of music a week, and between 1,000 and 3,000 hours of music a year. So that is part of the reason why we really want to think Christianly about this. Yes, sir? Yeah. But hearing still impacts emotions and other things in a way that matters. So, right, yeah, I'm not saying they're focusing on music, but music is part of our lives 25 to 50 hours a week, consciously or subconsciously. So we've talked about the importance of music in the Bible, God's creative miracle of music, the powerful emotional impact of music, and today, beauty, excellence, and morality. So Philippians chapter 4, you surely know Philippians 4, verse 8. Philippians 4, 8. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there's any excellence, if there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things. So he's talking here about the way we live based on the way we think, how the thoughts we think, how the things we think about shape our lives. And so that calls for a certain vigilance, a Christian perspective on what we think about, because that's then what shapes how we think and how we live. He's not talking about music specifically in this passage or any specific thing that he names. But earlier in Philippians, he prayed that their love would abound with all discernment, that they might approve what is excellent. So this applies to lots of things, but I think it raises a couple of very interesting themes in relationship to music, and then leads to a very important question about the meaning of music. So I'm just going to talk briefly about beauty, and then excellence, and then meaning. And we don't have live piano stuff to incorporate today, but I think this will be fun and interesting anyway. So let's start with beauty. Beauty, what even is it? Beauty comes from God and the way God designed things to be, especially, primarily, the structure of sight and the structure of sound. So for example, if you take surveys of people and what they think human beauty is, their answers are going to be based on structural things that we can actually measure and talk about in human faces and so forth. So God embedded structure and order into the world so that, and then he created us in such a way, so that sights and sounds can strike us as beautiful, be meaningful to us as beautiful. God himself isn't usually described in the Bible as beautiful. There are a couple references to that. Most often the words for God are words like splendor and majesty and glory, though it does say things like God is a crown of beauty for his people. But then the words for beauty are used for people and for all sorts of created things in the Bible. And I don't think the Bible specifically refers to beautiful music, but it definitely talks about beautiful worship. God commanded Israel to make the physical aspects of their worship very beautiful. So like Aaron's priestly robes, God told them, make those for beauty and for glory. And so you have all this beauty in the Old Testament externals of their worship. But it's not just there. Go all the way to the end of the Bible, Revelation 21. And when God tries to help us grasp what new heavens and new earth are going to be like, he pulls illustrations from what we think of as being most beautiful in human life that we know today. So beauty is important, and music has particular potential for beauty. It's got that amazingly complex structure that we've talked about briefly, and it unfolds over time in a way that allows us to trace these beautiful melodies and harmonies and other components, and even see them shift before us. You know, there was all these pictures and videos of the Northern Lights, right, 2 weeks ago, because we had that really unusual solar flare or whatever. And the part of what's amazing about the Northern Lights is that they're not a still photograph. We take photographs of them, but they move and they shift and they change, and that's what music does. It's this beauty that changes before us, and this is why even the definitions of music oftentimes directly or indirectly indicate that beauty is part of what distinguishes music from just sound. I didn't put this up on the screen, but earlier we used this definition from the Oxford English Dictionary. Music is vocal or instrumental sounds, or both, combined in such a way as to produce beauty of form, harmony, and expression of emotion. World Magazine recently published a profile of a young Christian composer named Elliot Butler, and he spoke about how in his college and graduate music training, he regularly felt this pressure from his professors to compose music that was dissonant, jarring, or clashing. And he was told, if you want to be up to date musically, this is the way you do it. And he struggled as a Christian. How do you think through that? How much do I respond to this pressure to create what is jarring musically? And I think in general, are we surprised when ugliness is trendy? It's not surprising, right? We know that the things that make music beautiful come from God. The mathematical structure of music, the miracle of how our minds perceive that structure with joy and with pleasure, all that comes from the Creator. So it's not surprising when the world says, hey, let's make this ugly instead, as they reject the Creator. We've also, though, learned that sometimes musical surprise can be wonderful, right? That sounds like minor keys or clashing chords can be appropriate sometimes, and that music can express things like lament. So we're not saying that all music has to be straightforward and simple and in a major key, but because we know the source of all the amazing structure and possibilities of music, and we know that the source of those things is a personal source. It's a God we can know, a God who knows us. And so we want to honor him with beauty, the potential for beauty that he built into creation. When he built it. We want to honor him with that. And that's especially important when we're living in a world where there's so much ugliness, as hopeless people just vent their anger at life and their anger at the world through ugliness. So I think Christians have really an opportunity to love and promote what is beautiful. All right? There you go. That was musical aesthetics in 8 minutes. So now let's talk about excellence. Now, when Philippians 4 refers to thinking about what is excellent, it's referring primarily to moral excellence, what is holy and righteous as opposed to being sinful. But the Bible also shows us that artistic excellence, including musical excellence, matter as well. And there are several different Bible themes that relate to this. I'm going to mention just 2 of them. And the first of them would be very familiar to us, and that's the theme of wholehearted effort. Like Colossians 3:23, whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men. Ecclesiastes 9:10, whatever your hand finds to do, do it with your might. So there is a way to live that is half-hearted, that is just kind of do the least I can do the cheapest way I can possibly do it, get by with the least possible effort. And that's just not the way somebody who knows the Creator is going to live. Because we know that not to go back and re-preach other stuff we preach, but God created us to work, right? Like that's been part of our essence as human beings, as these people who can produce and create and all this. And so to be like, I'm just going to spend my life doing as little as I can possibly do is not at all Christian thinking. So there's that theme of wholeheartedness in life that relates to excellence. But then there's also the biblical theme of skillfulness. And it's all over more than 60 times, I think, in the Old Testament we have that word. The curtains in Israel's tabernacle, for example, were supposed to be skillfully woven, especially the angels that were woven into those curtains. The Aaron's garments, those garments of beauty that we just talked about, were supposed to be made by those who were skillful. And it says that God filled those craftsmen and women with, quote, a spirit of skill. And that same thing is said about the carpentry, the stonemasonry, the metalworking, the engraving, all of that done by skillful people with skillful results for the tabernacle. And then later when they built the temple, God provided an abundance of skilled workmen, it says in 1 Chronicles 22. Do you remember the passage we talked about last week about David and Saul and this harmful spirit from the Lord that Saul had? And David would come and play the lyre and the spirit would depart from him. That passage says they sought out someone who was skillful to play for Saul. And then we read in 1 Chronicles 25:7 that the temple singers were skillful. And in 2 Chronicles 34 that the Levites were skillful with instruments. So there we have skill in singing and skill in playing. And then 1 Chronicles 15:22 says that the leader of the music in the temple should direct the music, for he understood it. So there was a skill in musical understanding combined with a skill in musical singing, combined with skill in musical playing, that all came together in temple worship. And then Psalm 33 verse 3 says, sing to the Lord a new song, play skillfully on the strings. So skillfulness matters just because it's good stewardship the created gifts God gave us. It's a way to honor the Lord, whether we eat or drink or whatever we do. So go all the way back to the creation mandate in Genesis chapter 1, and I would say that I think we can be certain that skillfulness is about taking the God-given potential that he built into creation and being wholehearted about it. It's being a good steward, a wholehearted steward of the potential that God built into creation. So he built into creation the potential for wood to be crafted into all sorts of things. Gorgeous cabinets, or these live edge tables they do today, where they do that rosin on them and stuff, and they're just these gorgeous pieces of that kind of work is skillfulness in stewardship in the potential God built into creation. I mean, who designed trees to grow in such a way that they grow in these rings so that when you cut it, it's pretty? God did. And so when we take that and maximize it, we're being stewards of creation's potential. Isn't that cool? So that's what skillfulness is about. It's not about, look at me and how good I am and how I can play my tuba and not make mistakes like you do when you play your tuba. It's like, let's be good stewards of what God built into creation and according to who we are. So every Sunday, we benefit tremendously from the work of men and women who have dedicated a lot of time to developing skill. So it starts with the skill of songwriters, right? These texts that we sing were written by people who develop skill in writing and poetry and understanding how congregational singing works. We have the skill of composers who write powerful music to support those texts. We have the skill of instrumentalists who've usually labored for many years, sometimes with thousands and thousands and thousands of hours of practice, so that then with skill they can play for us. And it's not like we're all sitting here demanding an incredible level of skill, and yet miss a few notes and all of us singing notice, which is why some of us are way too nervous to actually, play. Aren't you thankful for people who have the skill and the courage to go for it anyways, even though we'll all hear if they mess up? Though skillfulness can really serves us every Sunday morning, and that's from the Lord, and that can honor the Lord. But our commitment to excellence does not mean that the only music that matters is professional music. As a matter of fact, it's Christians who ought to get most excited about music making and encourage music making even in very amateur forms. So I'm on a little bit of a rabbit trail here, but it's a rabbit trail that's important for us later when we talk about gathered worship in the church and how we can develop that. Okay, when I say the word music here in 2024 to a room of Westerners in America, the Western world is what I'm referring to. When I say the word music, what comes to mind for most people is Spotify and Apple Music and YouTube and wherever else you consume music. And what do all those things have in common? Well, they're all recorded music. So what portion, a little bit ago, at the beginning I asked, how many hours of music hit your ears in a day? Okay, so what portion of that music is live, being played live? And what portion of that is recorded? Now, there are exceptions in the room. Some of you who practice instruments a lot, and so you hear lots of live music. But for the vast majority of us, it's like, well, what if we took church out? Because you hear live music at church. If we take church out, what percentage of the music you listen to is live, not recorded? And it's a tiny percentage for a lot of people, for the average person, right? So how long in human history, how much of human history has that been possible? Do you know when we very, very first recorded music? The very first phonograph, do you know when that was? Like late 1870s, so that was invented. 1880s, 1890s, people started to hear for the very first time a recording of music. So for all of human history before that, if anyone said the word music to you, instead of Spotify, what people would have thought of was live music. Somebody was making it. Somebody was playing it. Somebody was singing it, and you got to be there and hear them making music. And so it's only in the last 100 years or much less that people have had access to actually high-quality recorded music. This is a new thing. And so this means that today, the large majority of music that the large majority of people hear was professionally produced. Maybe it's a recording of a concert or something. More often, it was produced in a studio. And then they did stuff like take the voices and auto-tune them so that you have this perfectly produced studio production. And when most people hear the word music, that's what they're talking about. And yet that's nothing like what most of humanity has thought of as music. Now, I'm not in any way dismissing the beauty of studio recordings of music. I listen to tons of it. I am a very significant music consumer. I love, love, love music. So don't anybody think I'm criticizing recorded music. But the point is that this can all suggest that music is something produced by professionals and we all consume it, and it's not something that any normal people could ever create. None of us could pull off that kind of studio recording. There was a little birthday gathering for someone in church this week, and there were a few of us in a living room, and we were singing with a couple of instruments. And it was so wonderful. It was really just beautiful and really fun. And if you would have heard a recording of that, you probably would have went, we were just a bunch of people doing our best to make music, and it was really sweet in the moment. But compared to a studio recording, it would have been painful to hear, honestly. But it was live, and in the moment it was cool, because we were singing together to the Lord and making music together to the Lord. And so though we have the joy of consuming highly sophisticated, multi-track studio recordings all the time, let's remember as Christians, we ought to be the first people to know that God designed people to be music makers. So while we pursue excellence to honor the Lord, we also rejoice in the simple sound of a family trying to sing together, even when Aunt Margaret is way out of tune. We rejoice in the screechy, not yet beautiful sounds of someone trying to learn to play a violin. And your face goes, ugh. It is not excellent. It is not beautiful. It is the beginning of music making. And we say, that's cool. Keep going, kid. 15 more minutes. And we rejoice when our brothers and sisters, like, they're seeking the Lord, reading their Bible, and they're like, hey, a poem starts to come to mind. And they're trying to write a little bit of poetry to the Lord that maybe could even be sung. And they're probably not a skilled writer, and that's probably not really sophisticated. And some of the, you got a word that goes over 3 notes if they try to put it in music and breaks at all the wrong syllable places. And you're like, no, that doesn't really work. You know what we should say about that kind of thing? That's cool. Keep going. Be music makers, be music writers in terms of lyrics. We love all that, we encourage all that because we know God created us with the potential to be music makers, not just music consumers. And I tell you folks, our new age of AI is going to make this more important than ever. Because we're going to be at the point where if you want to put in musical effort, if you want to put in minimal effort, AI will just do it all for you. Create whatever music you want. And again, I'm not bashing AI as a thing in and of itself. I'm saying God created people to honor him with their stewardship of music and to be music creators, not just computers cranking out what we think we will like. All right, so I get it that not everyone is gifted for music. My point is not to say all of you need to go home and start taking music lessons. Our point is that let's not bury God's good gift of music because we're not professionals recording in a studio. Let's be music makers. And with all that the Bible says about Christians, making music together, we have to be music makers. God commands us as the church to make music together for his glory. So we've talked about musical beauty and musical excellence. Now this leads us to an even bigger question. 14 minutes, here we go. Is there right and wrong music? Don't answer that out loud, but answer that in your head. Is there right and wrong music? If beauty matters, if excellence matters, if, as we learned last week, music can help express or even direct our emotions, if music can be used for evil purposes, then could we divide all music into good music and bad music, right music and wrong music? Does music have intrinsic morality so that no matter where it's used, by no matter who uses it, the music itself is right or wrong, good or evil, always? If we answered that question yes, I believe we'd be placing music into the wrong category. There are certain things that go into the category of absolute right and wrong, good or bad. For example, like statements of doctrine. Okay, so the words, Jesus sinned. It doesn't matter if you are a Tibetan monk who says that on a mountain in Nepal today, or whether you were a Jew in Jerusalem in the first century who said it. It's wrong. Always, everywhere, no matter what language you say it in, Jesus sinned is wrong, right? Similarly, there are certain things, certain actions that are always wrong, like adultery. It doesn't matter if you're South African or Norwegian. It doesn't matter if you're young or old or whatever. Adultery is wrong. It's just always wrong. But there are many other things that require wisdom and discernment and applying Bible principles to know whether something would be right or wrong in a particular situation. That's why the Bible says things like Ephesians 5:10, try to discern what is pleasing to the Lord. And a really simple, clear New Testament example is circumcision. Acts 16:3, it was right for Timothy to be circumcised. Galatians 2:3, it was wrong if Titus had been, it would have been wrong for Titus to be circumcised. And then Galatians 5:2, it would have been wrong for the Galatians to get circumcised. Circumcision was right in one of those situations and not in the others. This does not mean that morality is subjective. It doesn't mean that we determine right and wrong based on our personal preferences or anything like that. It means that when the Bible doesn't clearly define whether something is right or wrong, then we need wisdom and discernment to decide what God would have us do in our particular situation. And that's the category that music fits into. There are words that could be spoken in one situation and be appropriate, and in another situation, they'd be wrong. There are emotions like anger that are right in some situations. You have to get angry about things that God hates. And anger in another situation could be completely wrong if it's self-centered or violent or whatever. So this is the category that music belongs in. It's not that we simply sort all music into good and bad, but we understand that music is a created tool that we can use. It's a stewardship from God, and we can use it in godly or ungodly ways. And in different people's lives, in different cultures, in different times, those decisions won't always look exactly the same. So let me try to just fill that out a little bit by tackling a few of the more difficult questions that would test what I'm saying. So these are the things that someone might raise their hand and say, but what about this? So let me just touch on a few of those very, very briefly. First of all, what about music that intentionally violates structure and order? So as we've said, God built incredible order into creation. We see that in everything from gravity to diamonds to the way male and female come together to be able to have children. And we also see it in music, the incredible math and physics that make music what it is. So what if we take that structure in music and we violate it? Are we creating wrong music? So for example, we can put notes together into combinations that are dissonant and don't sound very good to us. And they're difficult to sing usually when we do that. We can make rhythms that really mess us up, because right when we think we know what the rhythm's going to do, it does something else, and we're like, wait, what was that? We can take the sounds of a musical instrument and we can distort them. We can play with those frequencies and distort the sound that instrument's making, and then we can turn that distortion up more and more and more so that it sounds less and less like that instrument as the frequencies start to go all over the map. So if we do those things, are we creating bad music? Well, certainly those things can be used to communicate wrong. It's very easy to find music that expresses sinful anger and hateful violence with clashing notes and distorted instruments. And that's all over the place. So we could violate structure for evil purposes. And yet, we've also learned that music is a tool that can appropriately communicate things like lament and sorrow. And look at the Psalms. It can communicate questions and turmoil and doubts and hurt. And so musical turmoil or questions or harmonies that are unresolved don't have to be wrong, depending on how we're trying to utilize those things. And we've also learned that music is this amazing game of expectation, as our brains are incredible mathematicians, even for those of us who aren't mathematicians, and our brains are doing all this musical calculating, and our brains love this game of expectation, like, I think I know what's coming next. I think I figured out how this music works. And we subconsciously are trying to figure it out, and then we enjoy certain surprises or certain suspenseful sounds that then lead to resolutions. And so the question isn't, is it wrong to violate the structure of music? Any more than it was wrong for me as a kid to go ride on the Gravitron, which spun us around very fast for about 2 minutes. And when you spun around very fast, you could climb up the walls and defy gravity. And somehow back then I didn't get motion sick. And I can't believe I did that, but I did. And climbed the walls. The question is how we use those violations of musical structure. They can be used in ways that communicate helpfully and delight the soul. I mentioned the Surprise Symphony a few weeks ago, and I don't know how many of you have heard that, but it's a violation of music structure. And yet it's so fun. It's just like, here it comes. There it is. And then the music goes on. And it can be used in those ways, or we can violate structure in evil ways that combine with other communications about rebellion and shake a fist at God, and it can be really, really sinful. So violations of structure and order are a matter of wisdom and discernment, whether it's being done in a God-honoring way for right purposes or not. Okay, next question. What about lyrics? Can't lyrics make music bad? Okay, do you see the problem with that sentence? Can't lyrics make music bad? What's the problem with that sentence? Lyrics aren't music. Lyrics are combined with music. Can lyrics be bad? Oh, goodness, yes. Lyrics can be horrific, and there are endless songs that are just ungodly. Lyrics don't make music bad. Lyrics combined with music can be something bad, a bad song, but it's not the same thing as the music itself being evil by itself. And that same concept applies to things like performance and dress and body language. If performers get on stage and they're barely wearing clothes and they're performing in sexual ways, of course those things are sinful and wrong. They're misusing music together with those other things for sinful purposes. But that doesn't mean that the harmonies, melodies, rhythm of that music itself is wrong. All right, well, but here's another question. What about music with bad associations? Remember last week we learned that music is the most associative of the arts. It attaches itself to things most powerfully so that we can experience these amazing connections between music we hear and places we were in the past, things we did in the past, people we're with in the past. And so we have people here in our church family, some of you sitting right here this morning, who you lived in the open sin and rebellion of the world before you were saved as an adult. And there were particular types of music connected to those sinful lifestyles that you were living, well, when you were running your hellbound race. And there were certain places that used certain music to support sinful actions, and you may have watched performances that glorified and promoted sinful lifestyles. And so today, some of you who were in those situations, you don't want to listen to that music anymore. Even if somebody switched out the lyrics so that they were good lyrics, you still just don't want music that flashes you back to when you were just flaunting God and far from him and rebellion against him. So some Christians won't listen to some types of music because there's an association for them between that music and sinful things, and they just don't want to mess with that. They don't ever want to go back to that life of following the ways of the devil in the course of this world. That doesn't mean that the music itself was, again, that those melodies or harmonies or rhythms were in and of themselves evil. It's a matter of association, and association is a matter of wisdom and discernment. What would be best for me? And different people are going to make different conclusions before the Lord about what would be best for them. All right? Next question. What about really ugly music? Aren't there certain types of music that they're so ugly they must surely be sinful? Well, two things are almost always true of music like this. First of all, it's unlikely whether it should even be called music. It doesn't even have the kind of order and structure and beauty that should define music, so it's kind of a mute conversation, honestly. But secondly, that kind of music is usually combined with all sorts of other things that are just obviously not right, like screaming. Like the lyrics are just screamed at you in anger at whatever it is in the song they're singing at, but whether it's I don't know, capitalism or whatever. They sing about all kinds of things. The injustices of the world, whatever. So it's just very often combined with things that mean the Christian's going to say, no way, I'm not going to listen to it. But something else might be ugly, like that first violin practices of that little kid that you can barely even stand to hear. It's so ugly, but it's not sinful. It's the beginning of a process of heading toward excellence, slowly. So what's needed is wisdom and discernment. And I don't really think it's that hard to discern the kind of musical ugliness that's sinful, that Christians don't have to deal with. Okay, next question, and this is a big one for a lot of people, some people. What about angry music? Isn't some music so angry that it's sinful? Okay, so very similar to what I said about ugly music. First of all, oftentimes, really, really angry music is barely music at all. It's lots of violent sounds with a really loud rhythm and the occasional hint of something like a melody you might be able to pick up over there somewhere. And then it's usually combined with other things like hateful, angry, violent lyrics. So it's not usually hard to make the discernment decisions about that. But keep in mind that anger can be a proper human emotion. Sinful anger is just right anger twisted and perverted into something sinful. And so if we love God, there are things we've got to get angry about, and it's not wrong to sing about those things. For many psalms express righteous anger. So how do you sing a psalm that's expressing righteous anger? That's a tricky question, but it won't be like the hateful, violent expressions of the world's anger. It's not going to sound like that. But somehow there are appropriate musical sounds for lament and sorrow and even righteous anger. What about, is this my last one? Yep, last one. Well, we got to finish. What about sexual music? Isn't there some music that's so blatantly sexual that makes it bad? Well, Obviously, lyrics and performers and performance styles are many times sexually explicit. That's the norm in our world today. But the question Christians have asked, especially since the 50s and 60s, is whether there are certain musical elements themselves that are sexual. And really the reason for that question is because music is physical. From the very beginning of our lives, we move to music. And we could spend many entire sessions on music and the body. Even babies in the womb move around more when they hear music in the womb. And there are many things a composer and performer can do to increase the physicality of music. Certain rhythmic patterns especially make us feel like we really want to move. Stronger and louder rhythms often crank up the physicality even more. And this can reach a point where melody and harmony are just way back in the distant background, and the one dominating element that's left is just this overwhelming rhythm that makes you feel like you want to move. And that's what like nightclub music and so forth is. It's really dominating bass, shaking the whole place as people dance. And so lots of things I've already said come into play here. First of all, oftentimes it's less and less music and more just a beat, which is different from music. And then it's usually combined with many other elements of sexuality at the concert or at the club or whatever it might be. So the discernment about those things I don't think is usually very hard. But is the physicality of music itself wrong? And by the way, I should also point out that it's just good for us to realize pop music in general, like pop music means music that's popular, right? Whatever sells. It's the most dominantly produced music today is whatever will sell. Pop music loves to crank up the physicality because people like it. So the more the better. So whether we're trying to sell cars or whatever, crank up the physicality. But is it wrong that certain rhythmic patterns make us want to move more than others? And the answer to that is no. It's part of the miracle of God's design of music and our brains and our bodies. So it's just that unlike the world, which says, oh man, we could use this for evil purposes. We want sexual freedom. We could take these musical elements and we could crank them up and we could combine that with these other things. And that's what the world does. Christians say, God gave us these gifts. He made music so physical in how it connects with our bodies. How could we utilize that for his glory? With excellence, with beauty, with appropriateness. What are we trying to accomplish with this music? For example, a very, very simple and easy example is just that it is the physicality of music that allows us to sing together on a Sunday morning. It is our ability to hear and sense in our bodies that rhythm that makes it not just people singing all over the place whenever they want to sing. It is rhythm in our bodies that unifies us in congregational singing. And so there are right uses of rhythm and right uses of the other physical elements of music. So music is physical, and that physicality can be used for sensuality, but it doesn't have to be. And so what's needed here is the same thing we've said in every single category we've talked about. What's needed is wisdom and discernment, because that's the category that music fits into. Wisdom and discernment to use music's physical power in God-honoring ways. Okay, so music fits into that category. Things that require wisdom and discernment about what pleases the Lord. And the Bible doesn't provide a list of the good musical styles and the bad ones, or the good music and the bad music. Instead, it calls us to look carefully to discern what would please the Lord. And my point today isn't to give us like a thorough look at how we might, what factors we might think about in choosing music. That's not really the point. But you can see that there are just questions we're going to ask as Christians. Like for my own personal life, what music would build me up and help me honor the Lord? And in my setting, with my family, with my friends, in my church, what kind of music best helps us carry out our God-given purposes when we gather as a church? Or what music helps just build up our family? What are the things that would be true and honorable and just and pure and lovely and commendable and excellent? You see, what we're saying is, when it comes to music, it's not prove to me that this music's bad. I dare you. Like kids say to their parents. Like, prove to me why I can't listen to this. Okay, you're in the wrong category. That's not how it works. The question with music is, how can we prove what would honor the Lord? How can we discern what would be best, what would be most pleasing to the Lord? So kids, really the pressure's on you to prove to your parents that this would honor the Lord. listening to this, don't try to flip that on mom and dad. You accept your responsibility before the Lord. Now, what your parents say and your parents' guidelines are one of the factors in that decision. I'm not saying it's just entirely up to you, but I'm saying don't put the pressure on mom and dad like they have to prove to you everything that's wrong. God calls you to prove what's right. Discern what he would have. Is it beautiful? Is it excellent? Does it direct my emotions in healthy ways? Does it point me toward God and goodness? Those are the kind of things we ask. So, we can bring wisdom and discernment to this amazing gift of music from our Creator as we consider how we could honor him with it. That's the point. Father, thank you for this good gift. Help us to not just float along with whatever the world's doing and whatever they're listening to for whatever purposes, but to think like Christians about music, to think like followers of Jesus, to think like stewards of the Creator's good creation, and be wise in how we honor you through music. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.